Maya's hands were black with grease when the silver Bentley pulled into the parking lot of Henderson's Auto Repair. She didn't look up immediately. She was too focused on the timing belt of a '98 Honda Civic that had been giving her trouble all morning. The Indiana summer heat pressed down through the open bay door, and sweat traced lines through the grime on her forearms. "Is there an actual mechanic here, or just you?" The voice cut through the humid air with the kind of casual cruelty that came from never having to watch your words. Maya straightened slowly, wiping her hands on a rag that was already beyond saving. The man standing in the doorway wore a suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. His cologne reached her before his extended hand did. "I'm the actual mechanic," Maya said, not taking the hand. "What can I do for you?" He lowered his hand, a thin smile playing at his lips. Behind him a small crowd had started to gather, Mr. Henderson himself emerging from the office, then 2 of the guys from the tire shop next door, drawn by the presence of the Bentley like moths to flame. "Richard Castellano," the man said, as if the name should mean something. When Maya's expression didn't change, his smile widened. "I own the Castellano Tech campus just outside town. Perhaps you've heard of it?" Everyone in Madison County had heard of it. The sprawling complex had brought jobs and property value increases, transforming their small Indiana town from a dying industrial relic into something that appeared on lifestyle blogs as charming and up-and-coming. It had also brought people like Richard Castellano, who bought historic homes as investment properties and complained about the noise from the county fair. "I've heard of it," Maya said. "Excellent. Then you'll understand that I don't have time for incompetence." He gestured toward the Bentley. "The engine is making an unusual sound. I need it diagnosed and repaired. Today." Maya walked toward the car, her movements economical and precise. She'd learned to move this way. No wasted energy, no unnecessary flourishes. During the 4 years she'd spent working in her father's shop before it closed, and the 6 years since then, working for men who always seemed surprised that she knew the difference between a crankshaft and a camshaft. She popped the hood, listened to the engine idle for 30 seconds, then reached in and touched several points with her bare hands, feeling the vibrations, the heat patterns, the almost imperceptible irregularities that told stories to those who knew how to listen. "Your engine mounts are failing," she said, straightening. "The rubber's degraded, probably original, which would make them about 7 years old. They need to be replaced. I can have parts here by tomorrow afternoon and finish the job by Thursday morning." "Indeed." Castellano's face shifted through several expressions: surprise, irritation, then something harder to read. He pulled out his phone, spent 30 seconds typing, then looked back at Maya with an expression she'd seen too many times before. The look of a man who just had his assumptions confirmed by Google and didn't like being wrong. "Interesting," he said slowly. "And how much would this repair cost?" "Parts and labor, probably around $800. Could be a bit more depending on $800. He laughed, and the sound wasn't pleasant. "For something that could be diagnosed by anyone with an internet connection and 20 seconds. The watching crowd had grown. Maya could see Mrs. Chen from the diner across the street, Luis from the hardware store, and, worst of all, Tommy Brecker, who'd gone to high school with her and never missed an opportunity to remind her that she was fixing cars while he was selling real estate in Indianapolis. "Diagnosis is free," Maya said, keeping her voice level. "You only pay for the repair." "Tell me something," Castellano said, and now his voice carried to the gathered crowd. "How many years of experience do you have?" 10 years, 4 with my father, 6 here. "And how old are you?" Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. 28. 28, he repeated, as if tasting the number. "So, you've been doing this since you were 18. Did you go to technical school, get certified?" I apprenticed with my father. He was, but no formal certification, no degree. The trap was closing, and Maya could see its shape now, could see where this was going. She'd walked into it because she'd been focused on the engine, on the problem, on doing her job. She hadn't been watching for the game. Certifications aren't required in Indiana for general automotive repair, she said. But I have my ASE. You see, this is the problem with small-town America, Castellano said, turning to address the crowd now. No standards, no accountability. Anyone can hang a shingle and charge desperate people hundreds of dollars for work that may or may not be done correctly. The work will be done correctly, Maya said, and she heard the anger creeping into her voice, tried to force it back down. Will it? Castellano pulled a money clip from his pocket, counted out $100 bills with deliberate slowness. Here's what I propose. A challenge, a test, if you will, of actual skill versus claimed expertise. He held up the money so it caught the afternoon sunlight. The crowd pressed closer. Repair my engine, he said, without using a single tool, just your hands. If you can do it, if you can prove that you have real mastery, real understanding of these machines, I'll give you this $1,000, plus I'll pay for the proper repair. Hell, I'll triple your normal rate. But if you can't... He paused, letting the silence stretch. If you can't, you admit publicly that this shop isn't qualified to work on high-end vehicles, and you post that admission on your business's social media. The silence that followed felt like pressure, like the air before a thunderstorm. Maya's mind raced through the mechanics of what he was asking. Engine mounts required tools, a jack to support the engine, wrenches to remove the old mounts, sockets to install the new ones. Without them, "That's impossible," she said. "You know it's impossible." "Is it? I thought you were an expert. I thought you had 10 years of experience." His smile was sharp as a blade. "Or perhaps you've been overselling your capabilities all this time." Mr. Henderson stepped forward then, his weathered face creased with concern. "Now, Mr. Castellano, that's not a fair—" "I'm not interested in fair," Castellano cut him off. "I'm interested in competence. In this town, I employ 372 people. Those people trust me to maintain standards. If I can't trust the local mechanics to properly repair my vehicle, how can I recommend them to my employees?" It was a threat clear as day, a threat wrapped in a challenge, wrapped in public humiliation. Maya looked at the faces around her, Luis's worried frown, Mrs. Chen's sympathetic wince, Tommy's barely concealed smirk. She thought about the stack of bills on Mr. Henderson's desk, the suppliers who'd started demanding payment up front, the slowness of summer business. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch. Just the terms I stated. Use only your hands. No tools. 30 minutes. Either the engine runs properly or you admit defeat. And the parts. How am I supposed to install new engine mounts without—" "That's your problem to solve. That's what separates real expertise from YouTube mechanics." He checked his watch, a platinum piece that probably cost more than Maya's car. "You have 10 seconds to decide. After that, I take my business to Indianapolis and make sure everyone knows why." Maya's hands were still stained with grease. She looked down at them, at the calluses on her palms, the scars across her knuckles, the permanent crescents of black beneath her fingernails. These hands had rebuilt her first engine when she was 12, had held her father's hand in the hospital when the cancer took him, had supported her and her mother for 6 years in a town that still sometimes introduced her as Mike's daughter instead of by her own name. "I'll do it," she heard herself say. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Castellano's smile grew wider. "Excellent. I'll get the parts delivered within the hour. I'm curious to see what real skill looks like." He walked back to his Bentley, pulled out his phone, and made a call. Maya stood in the center of the garage bay, surrounded by tools she wouldn't be able to use, and wondered what she'd just agreed to. Mr. Henderson approached, his voice low. "Maya, you don't have to do this. The man's playing games." "I know," she said. "But if I don't, he'll make sure no one in this town trusts us with anything more complicated than an oil change." "And if you can't do it?" That was the question, wasn't it? If she couldn't do it, she'd have to admit defeat in front of everyone, post it online, watch Henderson's auto repair, lose the credibility it had taken decades to build. And for what? For a millionaire's entertainment? For his need to prove that his money made him smarter, better, more worthy? "Then I guess I'll find out what happens when you bet everything on yourself and lose," Maya said. She walked back into the garage, her mind already working through the problem. An engine mount replacement without tools. It was like asking someone to perform surgery without a scalpel, to build a house without a hammer. But there had to be a way. There was always a way. If you understood the system deeply enough, if you could see past the obvious solutions to the underlying principles. She just had to find it in the next hour before Richard Castellano returned with his parts and his smartphone camera and his smug certainty that he'd already won. The crowd began to disperse, but slowly, no one wanting to miss whatever came next. Maya pulled off her gloves and tossed them onto the workbench. Her hands were shaking slightly. Adrenaline, anger, and something else. Fear, maybe, or the recognition that she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. "You're going to need help," a voice said behind her. Maya turned to find Sarah Kim, who ran the machine shop 2 blocks over, standing in the doorway. They'd gone to high school together, had reconnected at their 10-year reunion 3 months ago over shared stories of being women in male-dominated trades. "He said no tools," Maya replied. "He said you can't use tools. He didn't say anything about physics, leverage, or creative problem-solving." Sarah stepped into the garage, her steel-toed boots clicking on the concrete. "And he definitely didn't say you couldn't have someone to think through the problem with you." For the first time since the Bentley had pulled in, Maya felt something loosen in her chest. "You're right. I usually am." Sarah walked over to the Bentley, peering under the hood. "So, engine mounts, no tools. This man really does think he's clever, doesn't he? He thinks he's already won. Then let's prove him wrong." Sarah pulled out her phone, started taking pictures of the engine bay. "We have an hour. Let's use it." They spent the next 45 minutes examining every aspect of the Bentley's engine, discussing possibilities, discarding ideas that wouldn't work, building on concepts that might. Other people came and went. Luis brought them cold water, Mrs. Chen delivered sandwiches neither of them touched. Mr. Henderson hovered nearby with increasing anxiety. But Maya and Sarah stayed focused, their conversation a rapid-fire exchange of technical terms and half-formed theories. By the time the delivery truck pulled up with the new engine mounts, Maya had the beginnings of a plan. It wasn't elegant, it probably wouldn't work, but it was possible. Theoretically, if everything went exactly right and she didn't make a single mistake. Richard Castellano emerged from the truck's passenger seat, looking fresh and cool despite the heat. He'd changed his shirt, Maya noticed. He'd gone home, showered, put on a different expensive suit, all while she'd been scrambling to figure out how to do the impossible. "Ready?" he asked, holding up the parts. "Ready," Maya said. He set up his phone on a tripod, angling it to capture both Maya and the engine. "For documentation purposes," he said. "I want to make sure everyone can see exactly what happens here today." The crowd had returned, larger than before. Word had spread through town, through text messages and phone calls and the mysterious small-town grapevine that moved faster than the internet. Maya saw faces she recognized from the grocery store, the gas station, the library. She saw Mr. Patterson, her high school shop teacher, standing at the back of the crowd with his arms crossed. She saw her mother, who must have closed her hair salon early, worry etched into every line of her face. 30 minutes, Castellano said, checking his watch. "Starting. Now." Maya picked up the engine mounts, two heavy pieces of metal and rubber, and walked to the Bentley. The crowd fell silent. Sarah stood beside her, close enough to help, but not so close as to interfere. This was it, the moment where she either proved she understood engines at a level beyond tools and textbooks, or the moment she failed in front of everyone who'd ever doubted her. Maya took a breath, placed her hands on the warm metal of the engine, and began. The Bentley's engine ticked as it cooled, each metallic ping a countdown in Maya's ears. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, 3 seconds she couldn't afford, and let her hands remember what they knew. Her father had taught her this, taught her to read machines through touch, the way a blind person reads Braille. Tools are extensions of understanding, he'd said, months before the diagnosis, when he still thought he had decades to pass on everything he knew. But understanding doesn't need tools to exist. She opened her eyes and began to work. The first problem was support. Engine mounts held the engine suspended in the chassis, bearing thousands of pounds of vibrating metal. Remove them without proper support, and the engine could shift, crack the oil pan, damage the transmission housing, destroy itself. Normally, you'd use a jack, carefully positioned to hold the engine's weight while you worked. Maya didn't have a jack. What she had was Sarah, a wooden shipping pallet that had held transmission fluid containers yesterday, and an understanding of leverage that went deeper than most people realized. "Here," she said, positioning the pallet under the engine at a specific angle. "We're going to use the engine's own weight to create opposing forces. The mounts are failing because the rubber's compressed unevenly. If I can shift the load distribution..." She wedged the pallet in place with her body weight, then nodded to Sarah, who carefully, precisely pushed against the engine from the opposite side. The metal groaned slightly, shifted a fraction of an inch. Not much, but enough. Maya felt the change in tension through her hands. The first mount, the passenger side front, was now carrying less load, still bolted in place, but the pressure had reduced enough that she could feel the individual components of the assembly. "5 minutes gone," Castellano called out. He was narrating for his phone, Maya realized, describing what she was doing with a tone that suggested he was watching a particularly unconvincing magic trick. She ignored him, ignored the crowd, ignored everything except the problem in front of her. The bolts holding the mount in place were the next obstacle. Normally, you'd use a socket wrench, apply torque in a controlled manner. Maya couldn't do that. But what most people didn't realize about bolts was that they weren't just about strength, they were about friction and geometry. The threads cut into metal created resistance that held things together. But that same resistance worked both ways. She reached into the engine bay, her fingers finding the bolt heads. They were warm, slightly oily. She gripped the first one, applied pressure, felt it refuse to budge. Applied more pressure. Her knuckles went white with the strain. Nothing. 10 minutes, Castellano said. "This is going about as well as I expected." Sarah moved closer, her voice low enough that only Maya could hear. "The thermal expansion. The engine's been running. The bolts are still expanded." Of course they were. Maya pulled her hands back, flexed her fingers. They were already aching, and she'd barely started. She needed the bolts to contract, needed the metal to cool just a few more degrees, needed time she didn't have. Unless... "Sarah, do you have anything cold in your truck? Ice? Anything?" Sarah's eyes widened as she understood. "Compressed air canister, for cleaning electronics. Hold on." She sprinted toward her truck, while Maya kept the pressure on the pallet, maintaining the angle that kept the engine's weight distributed away from the mount. Her legs were starting to shake with the effort. Sweat dripped into her eyes, stinging, but she didn't dare move to wipe it away. Sarah returned in 90 seconds that felt like 90 minutes. "This is going to be loud," she warned, then inverted the canister and sprayed the liquid propellant directly onto the bolt heads. The temperature differential was instant and extreme. The bolts contracted sharply, the metal shrinking just enough to reduce the friction in the threads. Maya gripped them again, twisted with everything she had. The first bolt moved, a quarter turn, then another. Then it was spinning, coming free, and Maya's hands were working on muscle memory now, her fingers flying through motions she'd performed 10,000 times. But never like this, never without tools, never with this much on the line. The first bolt came free, then the second. The mount sagged slightly in its housing, held now only by the engine's weight and the opposing mount. 15 minutes, Castellano said. His voice had lost some of its certainty. Maya didn't have time to feel satisfaction. She moved to the second mount, repeated the process, repositioning, cooling, twisting. Her hands were screaming now, the skin on her palms rubbed raw, but she kept going. The second mount came free after another 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours. Now came the truly impossible part. The engine hung suspended by forces she'd carefully balanced, but those forces were temporary, unstable. She had to remove the old mounts completely, position the new ones and somehow secure them, all while maintaining the precise distribution of weight that kept the engine from shifting. "Maya," Sarah said quietly, "I don't see how—" "The shipping pallet," Maya interrupted. "It's made of heat-treated pine, compression strength of about 1/500 psi. If I can wedge pieces of it into the mount points, create a temporary support structure that mimics the function of the old mounts." She was talking through the problem, the way her father had taught her. Speak it into existence, make it real by naming it. The next 10 minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. Maya broke pieces from the pallet, using only her hands, only leverage and force, and shaped them into wedges that fit into the mounting points. Each piece had to be exact, had to bear the weight at the right angle, had to hold long enough for her to position the new mounts. Her hands moved faster than thought, guided by a decade of experience compressed into this single impossible moment. She could feel the crowd holding its collective breath, could feel Castellano's camera recording her every move, could feel her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The old mounts came out. The new mounts went in. Her fingers found bolt threads in the dark recesses of the engine bay, threading them by feel alone, twisting them with bleeding hands until they caught, until they held. 28 minutes, Castellano said, and now there was something else in his voice. Surprise, maybe, or the first hint of doubt. Maya removed the wooden wedges one by one, feeling the new mounts take the load, feeling the engine settle into its proper position. She tested each bolt with her fingers, tightening them as much as she could without a wrench, using the friction of bone-dry metal on metal to create holding force. It wasn't perfect. In a proper shop, she'd go back with torque wrenches, measure everything, ensure each bolt was tightened to exact specifications, but it would hold. It would work. She stepped back, her legs nearly buckling, and nodded to Sarah, who moved around to the driver's seat. "Start it," Maya said. The engine turned over with the smooth, expensive purr of German engineering, and it ran quietly. No vibration, no unusual noise. The problem Castellano had come in with, the one he'd claimed anyone with Google could diagnose, was gone. The crowd erupted. Maya stood in the center of the garage bay, her hands shaking, her shirt soaked with sweat, and watched Richard Castellano's face cycle through a series of expressions that would have been funny if she weren't so exhausted. Disbelief, irritation, and finally, grudging respect. He turned off his camera, picked up the $1,000, and walked toward Maya with measured steps. The crowd parted for him. "That was—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Impressive. Genuinely impressive. I wasn't certain it could be done." "But you set up the challenge anyway," Maya said. Her voice came out hoarse. "I did. I assumed you'd fail. I assumed it would prove a point." He held out the money. "I was wrong." Maya took the bills with hands that left smears of blood on the paper. She hadn't realized she'd torn her palms that badly. What point were you trying to prove? That expertise is verified by institutions, not by claims. That credentials matter. He glanced at the Bentley. But perhaps I was thinking too narrowly. Perhaps you were being an asshole, Sarah said flatly. The crowd gasped. Castellano turned to look at Sarah with an expression of such genuine surprise that it almost made Maya laugh despite everything. Excuse me. You heard me. You came into this shop, insulted a skilled professional, set up an impossible challenge designed to humiliate her publicly, and now you want to act like this was some kind of learning experience? Sarah crossed her arms. You owe her more than $1,000. You owe her an apology. The silence that followed was different from before, tense, expectant. Maya saw people in the crowd nodding, saw Mrs. Chen whisper something to Luis, saw her mother's face tight with barely controlled anger. Castellano looked around at the faces watching him, and something shifted in his expression. The easy confidence cracked, just slightly, revealing something more complicated underneath. You're right, he said finally. I do owe you an apology, Ms. I'm sorry, I don't even know your name. Maya Grant. Ms. Grant, I apologize. What I did was unprofessional and unfair. I let my assumptions override my judgment. He pulled out his money clip again, counted out another $1,000. For the actual repair, once you've had time to do it properly with the tools you should have been able to use, and I'll pay triple your rate, as promised. He held out the additional money. Maya didn't take it immediately. Why did you really do this? She asked. This wasn't about my qualifications. This was about something else. Castellano's jaw tightened. For a moment, Maya thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my daughter wants to be a mechanical engineer. She's 17, brilliant, top of her class. She came home last week crying because her guidance counselor suggested she consider something more suitable for someone with her background, by which he meant a girl from a family with money should pursue something more prestigious. He looked at the Bentley, at the garage, at Maya. I wanted to prove he was right, that trades are for people who can't do better, that my daughter should stick with law school or medicine or something that won't embarrass me at the country club. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Instead, he continued, I just watched someone half my age solve a problem I couldn't solve with all my education and resources. So perhaps the embarrassment is mine after all. Maya took the money. Bring your daughter by sometime. I'll show her what a real engineer looks like. I might do that. Castellano gestured to the Bentley. How long before you can finish the proper repair? 2 days. I need to order the correct tools. Do it right. Take your time. And Miss Grant, thank you for the lesson. He got into his car, which no longer rattled or vibrated, and drove away. The crowd began to disperse, people calling out congratulations to Maya as they left. Her mother pushed through the remaining onlookers and wrapped Maya in a hug tight enough to hurt. That was the most terrifying and impressive thing I've ever watched, she whispered. Your father would have been so proud. Maya held on to her mother, letting herself feel the exhaustion now, the pain in her hands, the emotional weight of what she'd just endured. I'm not sure I would have done it if he were still here. He never would have let Castellano set up that challenge in the first place. No, he would have thrown him out of the shop. Her mother pulled back, examining Maya's torn palms. But he also taught you everything you needed to meet that challenge, so in a way, he was here. Sarah approached with a first aid kit. Let's get you cleaned up before you bleed all over your victory money. They retreated to the small office behind the garage where Sarah carefully cleaned and bandaged Maya's hands. While Mr. Henderson made tea, none of them drank. Through the window, Maya could see the empty bay where she'd just done the impossible, the tools on the wall that she hadn't been allowed to touch, the ordinary workspace that had become a stage for something she still didn't fully understand. You know everyone's going to be talking about this for months, Sarah said, taping down the last bandage. Probably years. I know. Ah, and you know Castellano's going to post that video. Might even go viral. I know. So what are you going to do? Maya looked at her bandaged hands, at the blood seeping through the gauze, at the $2,000 on the desk that represented more than just payment. It represented something she'd never had before, proof, visible and undeniable, that she was exactly as skilled as she'd always known herself to be. I'm going to finish that Honda Civic's timing belt, she said, with tools this time, the way it should be done. Sarah laughed. Of course you are. But as Maya walked back into the garage, she felt the weight of what had happened settling onto her shoulders. The challenge was over. She'd won. But something about the whole experience left her unsettled, like an engine that ran smoothly but made a sound you couldn't quite identify. She'd proven herself to Richard Castellano, to the crowd, to everyone who'd ever doubted her. But what had it cost? And what would come next, now that she'd crossed from being a good mechanic into being something else? A spectacle, a story, a woman who'd done the impossible and now might be expected to keep doing it. The Honda Civic waited in its bay, its timing belt half installed, its problem mundane and solvable and perfectly, wonderfully normal. Maya picked up her socket wrench, feeling the familiar weight of it in her damaged hands, and got back to work. Outside, the Indiana summer afternoon stretched on, hot and humid and unchanged. But something had shifted, some invisible boundary had been crossed, and Maya suspected that nothing in her life was going to be quite the same again. She just didn't realize yet how right she was. The video went viral. Not immediately. It took 3 days for the algorithm to catch it, for the right person to share it, for the cascade to begin. But when it happened fast. One morning, Maya was a mechanic in a small Indiana town, and by evening she had 40,000 comments on a video she hadn't known existed until her phone started buzzing so hard it fell off the workbench. Woman mechanic destroys Millionaire's impossible challenge. Sarah read from her phone, sitting on the hood of a Toyota Camry while Maya changed its brake pads. 12 million views. Jesus, Maya. Don't read the comments, Maya said automatically. Too late. Most of them are supportive. Some are. Less so. There's a whole thread debating whether you actually did it or if it was camera tricks. Of course there is. Maya talked down the last bolt, stood, wiped her hands. The bandages had come off yesterday, leaving her palms tender and pink with new skin. Can you hand me that caliper? Sarah passed it over. There's more. News outlets want interviews. A talk show wants you to fly to LA. Someone started a GoFundMe to send you to technical school, even though you don't need technical school, and it's already raised $30,000. Maya's hands stilled on the brake caliper. What? Yeah, and there are job offers. A custom motorcycle shop in Austin, a restoration garage in Portland, something called Premium Auto Collective in New York that specializes in high-end European cars. Sarah scrolled through her phone. This one says they'll triple whatever you're making now. I'm not leaving Indiana. I know, but Maya, this is getting big. People are calling you an inspiration. There are girls posting videos of themselves working on cars and tagging you. You've become a thing. I don't want to be a thing. I want to be a mechanic. Sarah slid off the hood, walked over to where Maya was standing. I know, but maybe those don't have to be mutually exclusive. Before Maya could respond, Mr. Henderson emerged from the office with his phone pressed to his ear and an expression she'd never seen on his face before. Panic, maybe, or excitement so intense it looked like panic. Yes, she's here. Yes, I can ask her. Hold on. He covered the phone with his hand. Maya, it's someone from the Department of Labor. They want to talk to you about participating in a campaign promoting vocational careers to young women. Tell them I'm busy. It's the Department of Labor. Tell them I'm busy fixing cars, which is my vocational career." Mr. Henderson hesitated, then spoke into the phone. She'll have to get back to you." He ended the call, looking slightly dazed. "This is getting out of hand." "It'll blow over," Maya said. But even as she said it, her phone buzzed again, and again, and again. It didn't blow over. By the end of the week, Henderson's Auto Repair had received service requests from 3 states away. People wanted the woman from the video to work on their cars, as if proximity to her hands would somehow transfer her skill. Mr. Henderson, to his credit, turned most of them away, but the attention was exhausting. Worse were the reporters who showed up unannounced, cameras ready, asking her to recreate the challenge, to explain her technique, to comment on women in trades or gender discrimination or the future of American manufacturing. Maya refused every interview, which only seemed to make them more interested. "You're handling this all wrong," her mother said over dinner that Friday. They were eating at the kitchen table in the house where Maya had grown up, the same table where her father had sketched engine diagrams on napkins and explained thermodynamics using salt shakers. "You should lean into it. Take the interviews. Tell your story." "I don't have a story. I fixed a car. That's it." "You did the impossible in front of a crowd. You proved something important." "I proved I can do my job. That shouldn't be remarkable." Her mother set down her fork with more force than necessary. "But it is remarkable, Maya. Whether you like it or not, it is. And you can either use that to make things better for the next woman who wants to be a mechanic, or you can hide in the garage and let the moment pass. I'm not hiding, I'm working. You're afraid." The words hung between them, sharp and true. Maya looked at her mother, at the grey in her hair that had appeared after the funeral, at the lines around her eyes that came from years of worrying about money, about Maya, about keeping the house and the memories and the life they'd built together from crumbling. "Of course I'm afraid," Maya said quietly. "Dad spent his entire career being the best mechanic in 3 counties. Everyone knew his name, knew his reputation. And he never got rich from it, never got famous, just worked himself to death fixing cars for people who sometimes didn't pay their bills. Your father loved what he did, and it killed him. The stress, the chemicals, the 70-hour weeks trying to keep the shop afloat. I watched it kill him, Mom. So yeah, I'm afraid that if I lean into this, if I become the woman from the video instead of just a mechanic, I'll lose the only thing I have of him left." Her mother reached across the table, took Maya's scarred hands in her own. "You think your father left you a shop, tools, a reputation?" She shook her head. "He left you himself, Maya. His skill, his integrity, his stubborn refusal to do anything halfway. That's not something fame or attention can take away. That's not something you can lose." Maya wanted to believe that, but later, lying in her childhood bedroom, with the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling, she pulled out her phone and scrolled through the comments on Castellano's video. Most were supportive, enthusiastic even. But scattered among them were the other kind. Fake. No way she did that without tools. If she's so good, why is she working in a nowhere town? Another diversity hire story. Probably has a team of men doing the real work. She's pretty. That's the only reason anyone cares. Maya closed the app, stared at the ceiling, and tried to remember why she'd agreed to Castellano's challenge in the first place. It had seemed simple at the time. Prove her skill, defend her workplace, stand up for herself. She hadn't thought about what would come after. The weekend brought a new complication. Tommy Brecker showed up at the garage on Saturday morning, driving a new Lexus and wearing a suit that looked expensive but wasn't. Maya was under a Dodge Ram, replacing a U-joint, when she heard his voice. The famous Maya Grant, too big for her hometown yet? She rolled out from under the truck, squinting up at him. "What do you want, Tommy? Just checking in on an old friend, seeing how you're handling your 15 minutes? He leaned against the Lexus, projecting casual confidence. "I've been telling people I knew you back when, that we were close. We weren't close. We went to the same high school. Close enough. Anyway, I wanted to give you some advice. Professional to professional." Maya stood, wiped her hands, waited. "You should cash out," Tommy said. "Take one of those job offers. Move to a city where you can actually make money. This garage, this town, it's dead weight. You proved you're better than this place. So leave." "Why do you care what I do?" "I don't, but I am trying to sell the Henderson building to a developer, and it would be easier if the business wasn't operating." He pulled out his phone, showed her a rendering of what looked like luxury condos. Premium residences at Madison Square. 5 units, starting at $400,000. Great investment opportunity. Henderson's isn't for sale. Not yet, but the old man's looking at retirement, and with the right offer. Tommy pocketed his phone. "Look, I'm trying to help you. Take a job in New York or LA, make 6 figures. Live somewhere that appreciates what you can do. I appreciate what I can do, so do the people here. The people here are broke. They're driving 15-year-old trucks and asking for payment plans. You're never going to make real money working on cars that should be in junkyards." Maya felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. "Get out." "I'm just being realistic. Get out of this garage right now, or I'll change your oil filter with my bare hands." Tommy raised his hands in mock surrender, backing toward his Lexus. "Think about it, Maya. Fame doesn't last, but money does." He drove away, leaving Maya standing in the empty garage bay with her hands clenched into fists. She wanted to throw something, to scream, to do anything that would release the pressure building inside her, but she just stood there, breathing, until the feeling passed. The week after that brought the strangest development yet. Richard Castellano returned to the garage, this time with a teenage girl who had his sharp features and none of his practiced confidence. She looked around the shop with wide eyes, taking in the tools, the lifts, the organized chaos of a working garage. "Maya, this is my daughter Eleanor," Castellano said. "I thought you might show her around if you have time." Maya glanced at Mr. Henderson, who nodded permission. "Sure, come on." She led Elena through the garage, explaining what each tool did, showing her the cars they were working on, answering questions that ranged from basic to surprisingly sophisticated. The girl was smart, genuinely interested, and after 20 minutes Maya forgot she was the daughter of the man who'd tried to humiliate her. "So you really did it without tools?" Eleanor asked, standing next to the bay where the Bentley had been. "Everyone at school says it was impossible." "It was impossible," Maya said. "That was the point. Your dad set up a challenge designed to prove I couldn't do something, so I had to figure out how to do it anyway." "Why would he do that?" Maya considered how to answer, glancing at Castellano, who was watching from the office doorway. "Because he was trying to protect you. He saw me as representing something that scared him, the idea that you might choose a path he didn't understand or approve of. That's dumb." "It is. But parents do dumb things when they're afraid." Eleanor walked over to a toolbox, ran her hand over the socket set. "Do you like it, being a mechanic?" "I love it. Every day is a different puzzle. Every car is a system of interconnected parts. And when something breaks, you have to understand the whole system to fix the individual piece. It's like being a doctor, but for machines." "Do people take you seriously?" The question cut deeper than Maya expected. She looked at this 17-year-old girl with her father's money and her own uncertainty, and she chose honesty. "No, not always, sometimes not at all. People see a woman and they assume I'm the receptionist or someone's girlfriend helping out or incompetent. I've had men ask to speak to the real mechanic while I'm literally holding the wrench. I've been talked over, talked down to, and dismissed more times than I can count. Then why do you keep doing it? Because I'm good at it, because I love it. And because the people who underestimate me don't get to define what I'm capable of. Maya paused. Also, there's a particular satisfaction in fixing someone's engine after they've insisted you don't know what you're doing. Elena smiled. A real smile, not the careful one she'd worn when she arrived. Can I come back? Not with my dad, just to watch, maybe learn? You can come back, but not just to watch. If you're going to be in this garage, you're going to work. There's a transmission that needs rebuilding in Bay 3. You can help me tear it down on Saturday. Really? Really? Bring old clothes. It's going to be messy. After they left, Maya stood in the empty garage and felt something shift inside her. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe this visibility, this unwanted fame, could be used for something beyond her own discomfort. But that evening, scrolling through social media, she found a new video. Someone had edited together footage of her challenge with clips of other women in trades, set to inspirational music, captioned with phrases like breaking barriers and smashing the glass ceiling. It had 5 million views. Maya closed her laptop and walked outside. The Indiana night was humid and star-filled, crickets singing their late summer song. She sat on the porch steps of her mother's house and thought about her father, about the shop he'd built and lost, about the legacy he'd left her that was somehow both everything and not enough. Her phone buzzed. Another message. Another interview request. Another person wanting a piece of the woman from the video. Maya didn't respond. Instead, she sat in the darkness and wondered when, if ever, she'd be able to go back to being just a mechanic in a small Indiana town, fixing cars and solving problems and living a life that was ordinary and hers. The answer, she was starting to suspect, was never. The transmission rebuild with Elena Castellano took 6 hours. Maya had expected the girl to get bored after the first hour, to realize that engine work was less glamorous than it looked in videos, to make an excuse and leave. Instead, Elena rolled up her sleeves, got her hands covered in transmission fluid, and asked questions that suggested she'd been studying automotive engineering on her own for months. The planetary gear set, Elena said, carefully removing a component and examining it. This is what allows for the different gear ratios, right? By engaging different parts of the system. Exactly. The sun gear, the planet gears, and the ring gear can be combined in different ways to create different outputs. Hold it up to the light. See that wear pattern on the teeth. That tells you which gear was taking the most load. Elena studied it with an intensity that reminded Maya of herself at 17, when she'd spent every weekend in her father's garage, learning through observation and repetition. It was strange, teaching someone who'd grown up with every advantage Maya had lacked, but the hunger for knowledge was the same. The desire to understand how things worked, to be able to fix what was broken, that transcended class and circumstance. By the end of the day, they'd completely disassembled, cleaned, inspected, and begun reassembling the transmission. Elena's hands were stained with grease. Her expensive jeans were ruined, and she looked happier than when she'd arrived. "Same time next week?" she asked, carefully setting down a clutch plate. "Same time, but Elena—" Maya paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your dad. Have you talked to him about this?" "About wanting to be a mechanical engineer? Yeah. We've talked." Eleanor wiped her hands on a rag that was already too dirty to help. "He's trying. He's not good at it yet, but he's trying." That's more than some parents do. After Eleanor left, Sarah stopped by with takeout Thai food and a laptop full of spreadsheets. They ate in the garage office while Sarah walked Maya through something she'd been working on for the past 2 weeks. "Okay, so hear me out," Sarah said, balancing a container of pad thai on her knee. "What if we use this moment, this visibility you have, to actually create something lasting? I'm not starting a YouTube channel. Not a YouTube channel, a training program. Sarah pulled up a detailed business plan on her laptop. Look, we have 2 commercial buildings sitting empty on Grant Street since the textile factory closed. We could lease them cheap, set up a technical training center focused on automotive, machining, welding, electrical, all the trades that are hemorrhaging talent because kids are being told they need 4-year degrees to be successful. Maya looked at the numbers, the projections, the carefully researched curriculum. Sarah, this would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. We don't have that kind of money. But we could. There are grants for vocational education, especially for programs that serve underrepresented populations. And with your visibility right now, we could attract donors, sponsors, maybe even partnerships with tool manufacturers or automotive companies. Sarah leaned forward, her expression intense. This is what your fame is actually worth, Maya. Not interviews or social media followers. The ability to build something that lasts beyond the moment. I'm not famous. You're a symbol. I know you hate that. I know you just want to be a mechanic. But symbols have power. And we can use that power to create opportunities for people who wouldn't otherwise have them. Maya stared at the spreadsheet, at the vision Sarah had laid out in charts and timelines and budget projections. It was ambitious, maybe impossible, definitely terrifying. What would my role be? She asked quietly. Instructor, curriculum developer, public face when necessary, but mostly mechanic, teacher, the thing you're already good at. Sarah closed the laptop. Think about it. No pressure. But I think we could do something important here. Maya thought about it for 3 days. She thought about it while replacing a water pump on a Ford F-150. She thought about it while her mother made dinner and talked about the neighborhood families struggling to afford car repairs. She thought about it late at night, staring at the ceiling stars, imagining a version of herself that was more than just a mechanic, but wasn't just a symbol either. On Wednesday, she called Sarah. Let's do it. The next 3 months were a blur of paperwork, meetings, grant applications, and late nights in the empty buildings on Grant Street, transforming them from abandoned industrial spaces into something that might, maybe, become a training center. Maya kept working at Henderson's during the day, but her evenings and weekends were consumed by this new, overwhelming project. They named it the Madison Technical Institute. Sarah handled most of the administrative work and fundraising, while Maya developed curriculum and reached out to other tradespeople who might be interested in teaching. Mrs. Chen donated money from her diner's profits. Louise committed to teaching carpentry 1 evening a week. Even Mr. Henderson contributed a set of older tools that were still perfectly functional. The viral video helped. Maya still refused most interviews, but she did a few carefully selected ones: local news, a public radio podcast, a written feature in a trade magazine. Each one brought attention, and attention brought funding. Richard Castellano made a substantial donation and committed to sending engineers from his company as guest lecturers. "You're good at this," Sarah said one evening as they painted walls in what would become the main workshop. "The teaching part, the vision part. Who knew? I still feel like I'm faking it." Everyone feels like they're faking it. That's how you know you're doing something worth doing. By early December, they were ready for their first cohort of students. 20 people had applied for the 10 available spots in the pilot program, a 16-week intensive covering basic automotive, welding, and electrical work. The students ranged from 18 to 62, from high school graduates to people looking to change careers late in life. Elena Castellano was student number 1. The opening day was chaos. Tools that were supposed to be delivered arrived late. The heating system broke down in the middle of Maya's welcome speech. One of the students realized he was severely allergic to something in the building and had to leave. But by the end of the first week, they'd settled into a rhythm. Maya discovered she loved teaching. Not the lecture part, she was still uncomfortable speaking to groups, but the hands-on work, the one-on-one problem solving, the moment when a student's face lit up because they finally understood how a differential worked or successfully welded two pieces of metal together. "You're a natural, mister," Henderson told her, stopping by one evening to check on the program's progress. "Your father would have been proud. He would have said I was wasting time on administration when I could be fixing cars. He would have said that. And then he would have been here every evening teaching alongside you because he couldn't resist sharing what he knew." The program's success brought new challenges. More applications for the second cohort, requests to expand into other trades, attention from state education officials who were interested in using Madison Technical Institute as a model for other programs. Maya found herself in meetings with people who used words like outcomes and stakeholder engagement and pipeline development. She learned to read budgets, to make the case for funding, to negotiate with suppliers and navigate bureaucracy. She was still a mechanic, she made sure of that, still spent 3 days a week at Henderson's, still taught hands-on classes at MTI. But she was also something else now, something she hadn't planned to become. In February, Tommy Brecker approached her at the grocery store. He'd aged since she'd last seen him, new lines around his eyes, his expensive suit not quite hiding a certain worn quality. "Heard your little school's doing well," he said, blocking her path to the checkout. "It's doing fine." The development deal fell through, by the way. Henderson wouldn't sell, and without his property, the whole project didn't make financial sense. He shrugged, trying to seem casual. "So I guess you got what you wanted. I didn't want anything from you, Tommy." "Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Look, I was an asshole. About the whole cash out and leave thing, I don't know what I thought. That success meant leaving. Sometimes it does, just not for me. Would it be weird if I asked about volunteering at the Institute? I'm not a tradesman, but I know accounting, business operations. Could teach a class on that maybe, if you need it." Maya studied him, looking for the angle, the hidden motive. But all she saw was a man who'd built his life around the wrong definition of success and was starting to realize it. "Come by on Thursday," she said. "We'll talk." Spring brought the first cohort's graduation. They held it in the main workshop, surrounded by the tools and machines the students had learned to use. 20 people had started, 18 finished, 16 had already found jobs in their new fields. Elena Castellano gave a speech that made her father cry. A 62-year-old former accountant named Robert, who'd discovered a passion for welding, showed off the metal sculpture he'd made, an abstract piece that somehow captured the essence of transformation. A single mother named Keisha talked about how the program had given her not just skills, but confidence, the belief that she could build a life with her own hands. Maya stood at the back of the room watching and felt something she hadn't felt since her father died. Not happiness exactly, something deeper. Purpose, maybe. The sense that the work she was doing mattered beyond the immediate fix, beyond the single engine or the individual problem. After the ceremony, Richard Castellano approached her with Elena at his side. His daughter was wearing coveralls with grease stains that wouldn't wash out, and she'd never looked more like herself. "She got accepted to MIT," Castellano said. "Mechanical engineering, full scholarship based on her work here and her project designing a more efficient engine mount system. The one that doesn't require tools to replace," Elena added with a grin. "Congratulations," Maya said, and meant it. "I wanted to thank you," Castellano said, "for that day in your garage. I came in trying to prove something small and petty, and you showed me something I'd been too narrow-minded to see." He gestured around the workshop. This is what real expertise looks like, not credentials or institutions. Understanding, skill, the willingness to pass it on. "You're welcome, but Mr. Castellano, you proved something too." "What's that?" "That people can change. That's harder than rebuilding any engine." After everyone left, Maya stayed in the empty workshop, running her hand over the workbenches she and Sarah had built. The tools arranged on pegboards, the organized space that had been chaos 3 months ago. Her phone buzzed. Another message. Another opportunity, another person wanting something from the woman from the video. She'd learned to navigate it now, learned which requests to accept and which to decline, learned how to use the visibility without letting it consume her. The video had given her a platform. What she did with that platform was up to her. She thought about her father, about the shop he'd built and lost, about the way he'd taught her to see past the obvious solution to the underlying principle. He'd shown her that mechanics wasn't just about fixing cars. It was about understanding systems, about how things connected and influenced each other, about solving problems with whatever tools you had available, even if those tools were just your hands and your knowledge and your stubborn refusal to accept that something was impossible. Maya turned off the lights and locked up the workshop. Outside, the Indiana spring evening was cool and clear. The sky, that particular shade of deep blue that came just after sunset. She walked to her truck, the same 15-year-old Silverado that Tommy had mocked, and drove home through the quiet streets of Madison, past the diner and the hardware store and Henderson's auto repair, where a light still burned in the office window. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Elena. "Thank you for everything. You changed my life." Maya typed back, "You did the work. I just showed you where the tools were." But as she pulled into her mother's driveway, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. She had changed Elena's life, and the lives of 18 other people who'd graduated today, and probably the lives of the students who'd come next, and the ones after that, in cohorts that would stretch into a future she couldn't yet see. The viral video had made her visible, but the work, the hard daily work of teaching and building and refusing to let obstacles stop her, that was what would matter in the end. She went inside, where her mother had dinner waiting and questions about how the graduation had gone. They talked for hours about the students and the program and the strange path Maya's life had taken since that August afternoon when a millionaire had tried to humiliate her and accidentally gave her a tool more powerful than any wrench. Later, in her childhood bedroom, with the glow-in-the-dark stars still watching over her, Maya pulled out her phone one last time. The original video had been viewed 43 million times now. Millions of strangers had watched her do the impossible, had left comments ranging from inspired to skeptical, had turned her into something larger than herself. But here, in this room, in this house, in this town, she was still just Maya, still a mechanic who loved solving problems, still her father's daughter, carrying forward his legacy in ways he never could have imagined. She turned off her phone, turned off the light, and lay in the darkness, thinking about the students who'd graduate next quarter, the curriculum they were developing for advanced courses, the dream Sarah had of expanding to other communities. The work was hard, the visibility was uncomfortable, the responsibility was heavy, but it was hers, built with her own hands, and no one could take that away. Outside, a car drove past with a muffler that needed replacing. Maya could hear it, could diagnose the problem by sound alone, could imagine the fix even in the darkness. Tomorrow, she'd get back to work. But tonight she let herself rest, surrounded by stars that had watched her grow from a child, learning about engines at her father's knee, to a woman building something that might outlast them all. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was real, and it was meaningful, and it was exactly where she was supposed to be.